Storyboarding, bitches. What? A really important part of being an animator is having a storyboard to follow. I mean, yes, if you're just animating a standalone shot, then you don't necessarily need a storyboard, but you'll still need a thumbnail, you'll still need to plan it. But apart from that, anything with a story behind it, anything like a music video, films, series, TV commercials, games, anything basically that has a narrative that you are animating needs a storyboard. Unless you enjoy self-flagellation in the form of banging your head against your desk after you've spent 10 hours a day for an entire week animating something and you suddenly realize that there's no continuity, that the camera work is bad and your staging is shite. I mean, if you want to do that, like, you do you, whatever. But your boss probably won't like it very much. But that wouldn't happen in a professional setting because your supervisor wouldn't let you get that far without a storyboard. Hopefully. But don't do that to yourself in your personal projects or if you're working alone, because who's got time for that? A storyboard is a visual representation of your script. It lets you see the script play out rather than just having to try and imagine it in your head. So you'll have your scenes or your shots in each panel consecutively as they run, and then you'll have notes on technical things like the camera work, the lighting, dialogue, specific actions, audio, things like that. So your storyboard is a guideline for animators to use while they work, and they're also really useful in pitches when you're trying to get the idea of something across to investors or directors or, anyone who needs to see the story before they buy into it. So they need to contain all that information so that people can tell straight away what the story is, and they need to be able to envision it as it plays out without actually seeing it animating in front of them. You need to have good visual storytelling skills. People need to be able to take one look at the storyboard and clearly see the story play out in front of them. It shouldn't need a long, elaborate written explanation under each panel. Even though you will include technical notes, you shouldn't need to rewrite the story basically under each panel. It should be very clear from the visuals what is happening. Obviously, if you're storyboarding just for your own purposes, if you're the animator and you're the only one who's going to be looking at the storyboard and using it, then it doesn't need to be as in-depth and complex as if you are a storyboard artist passing on the storyboard to other animators to animate with. So it all really depends on the situation that you're finding yourself in, how much you're going to put into the storyboard, how detailed it needs to be for the people using it. If you're the only one who's going to be using it, then you can literally sketch out stick figures. If you know what's going on, then it's all good. As long as you have a way to plan out your staging and your camera work and your continuity and your story, that's really the most important thing about storyboards. In a big production, if you're working on a team, then there will be several storyboard artists and each person will get some shots or a section to work on. And then there will be an overall storyboard director looking at those and seeing the continuity and how the story runs and the pacing and how it all works together afterwards. But there are also times when you'll find yourself being the only storyboard artist on something. Like if it's for a commercial or something short, then you're not necessarily going to have an entire team of storyboard artists working on it. And once the storyboard is done, whether it's the team of storyboard artists working on it or if it's just you alone, it's going to go to either a storyboard director or a creative director or somebody like that to oversee it and give feedback. It'll come back to you to do the revisions and stuff, and it'll go back and forth like that until it is finally approved and can go into the animatic stage. So now that you know what a storyboard is and its role in animation production, let's go into how you go about actually making a storyboard, because I'm sure that that's the main reason that you're here. Of course, with your storyboard being a visual representation of your script, to start your storyboarding, you need a script. Sometimes you'll receive the recordings from the voiceover actors as well before you start storyboarding, so you know what the emotional beats are, the pacing, and what sort of expressions and expressiveness you should be giving your characters in your storyboard. But again, it's situation dependent. You're not necessarily always going to get that beforehand as well. When I'm storyboarding, I personally like to look at the script and dissect that and decide on the context and the emotions, the camera work and stuff like that, and make actual notes, like written notes, before I even start going into thumbnailing, because it's just easier for me to process and think about things that way, rather than diving straight into thumbnailing and trying to visually portray everything right there at once. I like to sort of clear out the clutter and streamline it by jotting down notes first, what I think could work for those certain scenes, and then go into thumbnailing after I've done that. But that's just something that works for me personally. A lot of people just jump straight into thumbnailing, and that's totally just dependent on who you are as a person, how you process and think about things. It's just something that works for me personally. Thumbnailing or scamping is also a really important part of the storyboarding process, and it's a great way to streamline your process. Rather than just diving straight into the actual storyboarding, Thumbnailing it first helps you to brainstorm and helps you to work out different shots and different angles and what works best for your shots or your scenes without first going into the fine detail of doing the actual final storyboard. When you're thumbnailing, what you do is you plot out the panels the same as you would for a storyboard. You've got your panels and you need to decide on your aspect ratio from there, because you need to know what you're working with in terms of space and composition. So usually it's 16:9. Your panels need to be 16:9. And what you do is you sketch out your ideas in those panels really, really roughly. They're really small panels so that you can just concentrate on the most important visual aspects of the shot. So you're not worrying too much about lighting, time of day, audio, and those sorts of things now in the thumbnailing phase. What you're worrying about is the composition, the staging, what sort of camera angles are going to work, what's going to be the best for the flow and the continuity of the shot, and just for the general narrative and getting across the idea really strongly. This is where you can really play around a lot and brainstorm, and I suggest that you try out a lot of different compositions and angles for each shot so you can find out what really works best here. This isn't a time to worry about like the amount of time and detail you're putting into it. It's really, really rough, quick sketches just to see what's going to work with the composition and the staging. While you're working on it, you really need to think about the point and the context of the shot. Like, what are you trying to portray here? What are the emotions behind it? What is the point of the shot that you are busy plotting out here? And you also need to think really carefully about your focal point, because that's where your point comes across, the thing that you want your audience to be looking at and focusing on throughout these shots. So for example, if it's a really dramatic or emotional scene, your shots might run a little bit longer. You might use more close-ups and POV shots. You won't have as dramatic and extreme camera shots as you would if you were filming, say, an action scene where it would have a lot of cuts really quickly. The shots would generally be much quicker paced. You'd have more extreme shots to show the action and just generally try to make it more dynamic. Obviously, throughout the process, things are going to change, and this is why we're doing this whole thing. So you shouldn't be married to any one idea of a shot or a camera angle or whatever sort of approach you thought was going to work, because now you can see in front of you if it doesn't work. It's really a huge drag if you got into actually animating something and found out that it didn't work. So that's why it's such an important part of the process, and you shouldn't be scared to go back and change things. Even if you've done a few panels already and it seemed like it was working and now you suddenly realize that it's not working, that's why we're doing this. So if you have to go back and change things, it's all part of the process. Like, you should be changing things. If you're not changing things, there's something wrong. So in terms of the layout of a storyboard, you'll generally have a few panels set to your aspect ratio that you're using. Again, this is really important. Make sure that you know what aspect ratio you're using in your animation. And next to those panels or underneath them will be a few lines for you to just put in either dialogue or the action, camera moves, all the important technical details that you obviously can't portray properly in the visual part of the panels. Some storyboarding software, if you're not working on paper, if you're working straight in the storyboarding software, allows you to put those details in as metadata, but that's, totally dependent on what sort of pipelines you're using, what software you're using, stuff like that. So it's not always the same everywhere, but basically it's panels with visuals and then notes on the technical aspects of things. I'll put a link in the description of this video to the storyboard template that I made and I use, because I just find it easy to work with it this way. So if you want to go and download that template, it'll go to my Patreon and you can download it for free there if you want to use the same template that I do. Now, because you need to contain as much information as possible in your storyboard visually, that includes things like key poses, the emotions of the character, and general acting. So you're not just going to have a stick figure standing here at one side of the frame and then in the next shot he's somehow magically moved across to the opposite side of the frame, but he's literally just standing there like that. Like, that's not a good storyboard. It might work for some people. Again, if you're just animating for yourself, maybe that works for you, but generally that's not what you do if you're doing a proper storyboard for animation. You need to show the emotions, the emotional beats, the acting, the key poses, all that important information for the animators to see what's happening in the scene. Of course, time limits and budgets are a thing, so you might not always have as much time and budget to put that much detail into a storyboard, but the more the better, just to make the animation process a lot smoother. But the narrative and the acting should always be as clear as possible, whether it's actually a high detailed storyboard or not. I mean, you can have just a few lines and squiggles for the background and still be able to see the emotions of the character generally and the key poses, and just know in a general idea what the character should be doing in that scene and that shot. Like, I've seen a lot of storyboards from people who either just don't have a lot of experience storyboarding, or they're just really juniors and they don't think that the emotions of the character are that important. They think that the animator is just going to go and put in that information for them. But the thing is that you can't really work out pacing and timing and things like that if you can't see where the emotional beats are of the character, and you can't see the progression of their emotions or their actions in the scene. It's not as helpful to the timing and the pacing of the shot if you don't have that information in it. And it also just doesn't help you to understand the narrative that clearly if you can't see that the character in your storyboard is confused and that's why they've gone to investigate the situation. If they just had a blank face before and now they're suddenly doing something and you don't know what the link between those two actions was because there wasn't enough acting for the character there. So it is important to include as much of that acting information as possible. So what I like to do before I actually even start storyboarding or thumbnailing is plot out the environment that the scene is happening in its entirety. So I'll draw like an orthographic view of the environment so that at any given time I know where the entry and exit points are. I know that if I change a camera angle, I know it's going to be behind them and I don't get disoriented at any given time if a camera angle has to change and now I need to sit and think, is this the right perspective? Is the stuff that's in the scene behind them, is that correct from this angle? Because I have that reference point to go back to and look at. So if somebody's entering from this side and I turn and focus the camera on them, I know everything that's behind them from that perspective because I've already drawn it out in its entirety and I can imagine where the camera is in the scene from that view at any given time. So then I don't have to sit and think about it while I'm trying to storyboard. It's also really useful to avoid breaking the line of the camera or breaking the 180-degree rule, which is something I'll talk about more in the next video that I do about camera work, because it's really important to not break continuity and disorient the viewer, not to cross that line. So basically it's a line across your scene that your camera can't cross, because if it does, if it's on this side and then it crosses the line to that side, then everything sort of swap places and the audience can get really confused and disoriented. But again, like I said, I'll talk about that more in the next video. So if you want to do this yourself, plot out your environment in its entirety before you start storyboarding. You can even place your characters in that environment, so you have a good reference point of where they are in the scene and what sort of environment is around them there and where the other characters are going to be placed around them from any change of the camera angle. So once you know the environment that your characters are going to be in, you've got your script, you've got your context, you've possibly got your voice acting, maybe not. You need to also know who your characters are and what they look like, because if you're drawing your storyboard with your characters in and you don't know what your characters look like, how are you going to tell anyone apart unless you've literally got their names written on them throughout the storyboard, which is ridiculous. So you should, by this point in the process, have your character designs and your character sheets with you so you can reference your characters and the characters in your storyboard look like the characters that they are. Again, if you're doing it for yourself and you've just got little stick figures and you know, like, this stick figure with the big curly hair is this character and this stick figure with this weird ass hat on is this character, cool, you do you, that's all well and good. But in a professional setting, in a production setting, you need to have the characters looking like who they are. So once you have all this information, you can start thumbnailing. You'd think with all this talking that I've been doing, we've already gotten very far into the actual storyboarding, but no, we're still on thumbnailing. So you'll roughly sketch out in your panels your ideas for each shot, try a few different angles, try a few different approaches in each panel so that you can get the one that looks the absolute best. Again, you're not meant to be spending too much time on these, so don't be too precious with it. Just brainstorm, have fun, see what works. So you'll usually start off with your establishing shot, unless obviously you're working on a shot that's sandwiched between someone else's shot and they dealt with the establishing shot. But if you're doing a storyboard by yourself, you'll usually start off with your establishing shot and move on from there. So something that I noticed in college and what I still notice with people who are inexperienced with storyboarding or just plain old lazy is that they don't break down the shots enough. Now, I already mentioned that you need to include things like key poses, but a lot of people don't. They have a character on this side of the room and then suddenly the character's on this side of the room. And that's not the proper way to go about it for the animator to be able to see what is happening in between this position and this position. So you need to make sure that you are breaking down your shots enough and you have enough panels to show the progression of the shot and the actions that the character is doing in the shot. So you'll basically use a new panel whenever there's a new emotional beat or physical beat or a change in a key pose. Some storyboard artists go even further than that and they'll include even like a bunch of in-betweens, but generally just including key poses and acting beats and stuff like that, that's usually sufficient. So whenever there's a change in the scene, that needs to be apparent there. So once you've done your thumbnailing, you've got all your shots planned out and thumbnailed there for you, you've chosen the best one and you see what works for the narrative and the continuity of the shot, then you can go into the actual storyboarding process. So this is where you'll go a little more in depth, refine it a little more, have more details. Your characters will look a lot more like the characters, because when you're thumbnailing, you can use stick figures and stuff like that as long as you know who is who. But in your storyboard, the characters need to look like the characters. So this is where you're going to go in and make everything a lot more refined, a lot more easy to read for anyone else who's looking at the storyboard. You'll include light sources, time of day, camera moves, things like that. So a little hack here, a little sneaky tip from me to you, if you will, is you can just take your thumbnails, scale them up and fit them into the panel of your storyboard, and then sketch over those and refine those further, but use the thumbnails as your actual blueprint for your shot. You don't need to go and redraw just like copying it across. Just go and copy it, paste it into the panel, draw over it and refine it like that, because that really speeds up the process a lot. It's not cheating. It's not cheating. You already drew the thumbnail. You're just using that as your direct blueprint for your storyboard. You'll make notes, as I mentioned before, on what the camera is doing, and if there are any camera movements like tracking in or panning. You'll include indicators like arrows in the frame to show the direction of movement, and note those camera moves under the panel along with audio and whatever other notes are relevant to the panel. I'll go into more detail in another video about camera work because it's really important, but it'll make the video way too long to go into it here. So once you've polished it up, don't polish it up too much though, because you are going to still have to send it to your supervisor or your director or whatever, and they're still going to give you feedback. But once they're happy with the staging and the composition and the narrative and everything is good for them like that, then you can go in and you can add other details like some colors, some different tones, so that you can see the midground, the foreground, the background, and everything's a bit more legible, and so that your focal point can become a little bit clearer. That sort of thing can help a lot with the legibility of your storyboard. And then once you've got your storyboard done, you can cut it into a rough animatic just to see the flow and see if the pacing is good and if it all really works when it's in motion, because sometimes your storyboard looks really great down on paper as you're reading through it, and then when you cut it together, you see that there are still a few little problems. So you can go and turn it into a little animatic for yourself to see how it runs. A lot of storyboarding software has an export function that already does that for you. Again, it just depends on what tools you're using. You can go do that, and that really helps you to see the flow and the pacing and see if the narrative's actually working. So those are the basics of storyboarding. Hopefully that gives you an idea now on how to storyboard, the most important things, the groundwork and the basics. Like I said, I am going to do another video where I go more into camera work, so you can learn about things like pans and tracking and dollies and all those sorts of things, the different camera angles that you can use for different impacts and different emotional and dramatic shots, because that stuff is really important in the planning of your animation, in the storyboarding, and in the animation itself. So make sure that you do look out for that video. It'll be the next video that I do, the follow-up in probably 2 weeks' time, because I'm doing 2 videos a month at the moment. That's all I can really manage. It takes a lot of time. You guys would be surprised how much time it takes to make these videos. So that'll be the next video that I do, and it's going to be a really good one. So watch out for that. Instead of watching out for it, if you're not subscribed yet, you could subscribe. How's that for an idea? And you could hit that notification bell, because like I said, I'm not uploading at a certain time every single week. It's every second week probably. So hit the notification bell, subscribe if you haven't already, hit the like button. It really helps with the algorithm, and hopefully you do genuinely like the video. So don't be stingy there. It's just a little tap tap. And leave a comment, because I like hearing from you guys. Like, I genuinely do. I like to hear your input about the videos, your feedback, your ideas if you have any. Even let me know what sort of videos you think that I should do in the future, what sort of thing you'd like to see coming from me. And I always read your comments and I always try to reply to them. So leave a comment if you want. I like that. And as always, thank you to my patrons. You guys are the real MVPs. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the support you give me. I hope you're liking the content that I'm putting out there. Don't forget to download the storyboard that I'm going to post up there, the storyboard template. It's going to be in a PSD and a PDF format. And that one's going to be free for anyone. It's not just for my patrons. I'm just putting it up on my Patreon. And yeah, thank you guys for the support. So thanks for watching, guys. Love ya. Bye.